Hello there. Happy 4th of July to all of my American listeners. Thank you all so much for taking the time to listen to today's episode. We have some more updates on Evgeni Malkin and Kris Letang. I feel like I've been saying this for the last week or so. Now, this comes courtesy of Pierre Lebrun and his Rumblings blog. And we're also going to get into some more draft stuff today. My buddy Jason and I, we have finally finished our big board. Well, he kind of did a lot of the work because he's definitely more into the prospects than I am, but I still was able to pitch along whatever help he needed. And we have the big board all ready to go. I'm going to debut the full thing later this week before the first round of the NHL draft. We're going to go over some more players today who definitely could be on the radar for the Penguins when they do make their first round pick. So that's basically, the gist of what today's show is going to be about. So without further ado, let's get right into it.
You're Locked On Penguins, your daily podcast on the Pittsburgh Penguins, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello and welcome back to another episode of the Locked On Penguins podcast. I am your host, Hunter Hodes. Remember to follow me on Twitter at Hunter Hodes. Follow this show's Twitter at LO_Penguins. Today's episode is brought to you by BetOnline. BetOnline has you covered this season with more props, odds, and lines than ever before. That is BetOnline, where the game starts. So let's get right into it. So Pierre Lebrun had his big Rumblings blog today. And a little further down, he did get into the Evgeni Malkin and Kris Letang contracts. And he said, still from to my knowledge, there's been no breakthrough on the contract fronts. But although my sense is that there has been some movement from all sides. That is very good news. It's been reported by multiple outlets that the Penguins and Evgeni Malkin have really not been close on a contract extension. But the fact that LeBrun is now saying that there's been movement on both sides when it comes to that one, that's good news, as free agency is now only 9 days away. We've all known that, a Letang extension is, I wouldn't say it's imminent, but, there's momentum building that it's going to happen. So I'm not really surprised that, there's movement on those two sides. But, I'm glad that, it looks like Evgeni Malkin and the Penguins are, they're hopefully slowly starting to move towards getting a deal done. He says, I've been told that the Penguins' original position was a 2-year extension for each player, and they both balked at that. And my thoughts on that, no wonder they're going to balk at that. In my opinion, I think that's a low ball offer. These two players have been in your organization for 16 years. They don't deserve to have 2-year offers. And if they were to take them, I kind of feel bad because, I think they deserve a little more flexibility than that. I get where Hextall is coming from in that regard, because he doesn't want to commit a lot of term to players 35 and older. That's the only part I get. But, the fact that, that's your first offer being made to franchise legends, of course they're going to balk at that if that report is true. They're not going to accept 2-year terms. Malkin, he wants to go out with Sid Letang. He wants to play potentially even longer than that. I am not surprised in the slightest that, they decided to not take that. He does say, I believe the club has moved on with term to 3 years for each, but the AAV also matters, and I don't have a good read on where that is in each case. I'm good. We've all known that Evgeni Malkin and the Penguins, they agreed on the term for 3 years. I think Joey reported that on The Athletic. I think Friedman reported that on 32 Thoughts. It's just that the money has really not been there for Letang. Yeah, I'm glad that they're at least willing to go 3, but I think you're going to have to probably push it to 4 or 5. And remember what Elliot Friedman said on the 32 Thoughts podcast and the blog, over the weekend. He said, I know he talked to an executive, and he said the Penguins are willing to go into what they consider very uncomfortable territory to keep Letang. I would have to think that involves a 4 or 5 year term, and if they can just come together on the money, the AAV, whether it's 7.8 to 8 million or a little over 8 million or something like that, they'll have a deal done sooner rather than later. He says Pierre Lebrun also says the two players are represented by different agents, so it's not like they're in lockstep on what they ultimately want, but I'm guessing both would prefer a 4-year extension, at least if the AAV is going to be club friendly. He says, I think in the end, Letang does get done. He will stay in Pittsburgh. That said, I don't have as good of a read on the Malkin path right now. So he is in line, I think, with what a lot of other people around the team or nationally are saying. Josh Yeo, Elliot Friedman, a couple others, they think that Letang is going to get done in the next 9 days. It's just the big one is, what's going to happen with Evgeni Malkin. I think I had a couple people talk to me or just ask me in my Twitter mentions a couple of days ago. They're like, what, if you were to bet, if you were a betting man, what are the odds that Malkin comes back? And, I got to be honest. I don't know if I said it on the show, but I said I think it's below 50% right now. If I were to place a bet on FanDuel, BetMGM, Caesars and all that stuff, I do not think he would be coming back. And obviously, the Penguins, they would have to, look for his replacement. It's pretty crazy, when you think, just talking about replacements, because, Nick Kypreos spoke today on his podcast with Elliot Friedman, and he was talking about Nazem Kadri, who is outside, I would say, of Evgeni Malkin. He is the top free agent center on the market. It's not close. He just had a 100-point season. He's going to get a lot of money. And Kypreos said, the number I hear is that it starts at $8 million. It could go as high as $10 million. The teams I'm hearing out there, two teams that can really go after him are the Seattle Kraken and the Boston Bruins. If you're going to sit here and tell me that you would rather pay Nazem Kadri $8 to $10 million per year over Evgeni Malkin when he could come in at maybe 7 to 7.5 per year, would love to know what you're smoking. Here is what Nazem Kadri has done over his last 5 seasons. 2017-18, he had 56 points per 82 games. Next year, 49 points per 82 games. Next year after that, 58 per 82. After that, 46 per 82. This year, 100. Where is the outlier? Oh, well, yeah, it's this year. The team that is going to sign this player is probably not going to get the level of production that we saw from him this year during any year of that deal. I could be wrong, but I do not see him hitting 100 points for another team, whether it's on a middling team that's a fringe, that could make the playoffs next year, or a team that's rebuilding but wants to accelerate that process. I do not think he even hits close to 90 or 100 points again. Could he hit 70 to 80? Absolutely. I think he's a really good player in the NHL, but you're going to be paying top dollar, I think, for past performance. I'm glad that the Penguins will probably steer clear of him if Malkin does not come back. And yeah, that's not to say that I don't think Kadri is a really good player. I think he's awesome. But for that price tag, I would much rather have Evgeni Malkin for the next 3 years at 7 to 7.5 million than pay Kadri, 7-year term, 8 to 10 million per. That's just, you're going to get in a bidding war at that point, and you're just going to be overpaying a player that, should just not be getting that kind of money on the free agent market. That's just how I see it too. And then I already touched on the Vincent Trocheck stuff. He's going to probably get 6 times 6 or maybe a little bit more. That's crazy talk for me too, for someone who's never been a point per game player in his career, never been a point per game player in the playoffs. Either, I'll say this again, if he was not from Pittsburgh, I really do not think anyone would know who he was. So had to touch a little into that to finish up this first segment of the episode. Coming up in the second segment, we're going to get into some more draft talk for the Penguins and look at some players who definitely could be there at 21. And, do they make sense for that? But before I get to that, BetOnline.net is your number one source for all of your betting needs and sports info. You can find all the latest sports developments, league reviews, and news, including this year's NHL playoffs and Major League Baseball. BetOnline is your continued source for all your sports wagering information, including live betting, esports, and scores. And BetOnline remains the best spot for all of your sports scores, podcasts, and news this season. It's the fastest, easiest way to check in on all your favorite sports and events, including MMA, boxing, and golf. You can head to the website today or use your phone to learn more about the trends in action. That is BetOnline, where the game starts. All right, I'm back here on this episode of the Locked On Penguins podcast. I am your host, Hunter Hodes. Remember to follow me on Twitter at Hunter Hodes. Follow this show's Twitter at LO_Penguins. So let's get into a little more of, my draft, Jason and I's draft big board here. Again, I credit to him for basically doing almost all this. He does this on his spare time. This is not his full-time gig. I can't thank him enough for really, just getting a lot of this done. And, I was able to put my input a little bit in there as well. So let's get into some of the players who I think could be lottery tickets for the Penguins at their pick. And so obviously one of them who I am a lot higher on than Jason is Lane Hutson. He is a threat with the puck at all times. A couple of comps compare him to Letang and Adam Fox. He's probably not going to arrive, I would say, for the next few years. But, the biggest thing is he's 5'8" and 150 pounds. Defensemen that size do not make the NHL as often anymore. He's trying to break the mold a little bit there, but he has serious talent. Jason and I, we think he's the smartest player in the draft. His hockey sense is, through the roof. He has great vision, a great first pass, really good stick handler. He's good in transition. And again, as we say here in our review, nobody his size has usually been an impact defenseman in the NHL. His skating could use a little bit of work, but his edge work is ridiculously good. Offensively, has a nice shot. He can really do it all for you. And I do think he will be there for the Penguins when they pick. It's all a matter of, are Brian Burke and Ron Hextall willing to take the chance on him despite him not being, that big, and for someone who, could definitely be, or who could just, definitely turn into a bit of a bust. He is a left-hand shot, so he's maybe not, a pure Kris Letang replacement down the road. So, he'll probably be, but if he pans out, he'll be a top pairing defenseman on the left side. But, I think he's still a good enough player where I think he's worth the risk to take here when the Penguins make their first round pick. Now, I've discussed Brad Lambert a little bit on this podcast. So he is a center, 6 feet, 175 pounds, shoots right. Some of his comps, Kasperi Kapanen on the low end, Matt Barzal on the high end, or potentially even higher. He is a player, I think, that a lot of people, this is a weird comparison, but I kind of compare it to, the Star Wars fandom where, how do you rank The Last Jedi, which is the 8th movie in the franchise? You either kind of love it or you hate it. It's split down the middle. I think a lot of draft scouts and pundits here are split down the middle when it comes to Lambert. Jason, he's not as high on Lambert as some other people are. I'm kind of iffy on him, but he's a really good skater. I mean, you can't teach that. Just put on the highlight tape. He will beat basically anyone in a 1v1 going up the ice. And if he has the puck, good luck getting it off of him because, just with the way he flies into the offensive zone, he's ridiculously explosive. He can just burn defensemen on a nightly basis. And the biggest thing about him being a lottery ticket is that a lot of the other parts of his game, they've not really developed since he came onto the scene a couple of years ago. He's definitely been banged up. Changing teams has also, I think, been a factor. I think he's also playing on a couple of lines where, he's had to do, I think, a lot of the heavy lifting offensively. He hasn't, been able to play with, I guess, a lot of high-end talent, which I think has kind of affected his numbers a little bit. And, obviously his production has definitely been a bit poor in league play. But that said, if he puts all of it together and he works on a couple of things, I think he could potentially be the steal of this draft. But if he doesn't, and he is not able to work on some of those things, that's where the bust label, comes in here. And, I'm not saying Kasperi Kapanen is a bust for being a first round pick. I think he's had a fine NHL career, but, that's the potential ceiling for someone like Lambert. And I think the Penguins, they would need more than that in their future if he were to be the selection, at least in my opinion. Couple other guys. So Jack Hughes, 6-foot center, 170 pounds, shoots left. And no, it is not the Jack Hughes on the New Jersey Devils. In our opinion, he's probably one of the most skilled and creative players in the draft. He's a great 200-foot player with great vision, high-end puck skills. He can improvise on the fly. He's already played a year of college hockey, so his potential arrival could be only a couple years down the line and not like, 2025, 2026. Here's a fun fact. For those that don't know, he is the son of Montreal Canadiens general manager Kent Hughes. So maybe he's drafted by him at some point, even though Montreal has the top overall pick in the draft. But, obviously he's not going to go there. But, maybe if he somehow makes it out of the first round, maybe he's drafted by his father at that time. But, I think the biggest knock on him is his skating. He's not, really that quick on the ice. But if he can really improve that, and add that to his already really good vision with his playmaking ability, his really strong shot, I think he's probably going to be one of the steals of this draft too. And, a couple comps that, we put in here, someone like Nick Suzuki, Vincent Trocheck, two pretty good players, I should say, especially someone like Suzuki, who I think is going to be a better player than Trocheck will be during his career. So I could look, the Penguins could look to draft Hughes. And then the last guy, Noah Warren, a defenseman, right-hand shot. A couple comps, Nikita Zadorov, someone who took a little bit of time to come up and play, at his top level. But then he also could be like someone like Ristolainen, who, he's a physical, nasty defenseman, again, big right-hand shot, decent mobility, but, it's mainly his defensive game that's better, I think, than his offensive game. His first pass, definitely not there, at least for us. But, this kind of screams like a typical Ron Hextall, Brian Burke pick, someone who, again, who we think is a nasty defenseman. Brian Burke loves his truculence. The Penguins, they don't really have too many of those kind of players on this team. So would not be surprised at all to see him be the pick there. But again, if he pans out, you have a decent defensive defenseman and someone who could also, potentially be good offensively as well. Again, if he improves that first pass, gets better in the transition game, if he, also works on, his puck skills in the offensive zone, I think he could be a boom guy very quickly. So those are the four guys that we have as true lottery players. And I think all four players will definitely be there for the Penguins. I'm going to have more on our draft board a little later on this week. I might even do something each day leading up to the first round before I have a full preview of, who I think the Penguins will take during the first round on Thursday. So that wraps up this second segment with our lottery guys and who, it wouldn't, I don't think they would be bad picks per se for the Penguins, but I think some people need to be careful about, saying, oh my God, these are going to be such great picks, because there's definitely, I think, some bust potential with some of these guys. So, that wraps up this segment. Still have a little more to get to for this episode of the Locked On Penguins podcast. So look around for that coming up here in this next segment. All right, I'm back here in this episode of the Locked On Penguins podcast. I am your host, Hunter Hodes. You want to follow me on Twitter at Hunter Hodes. Follow this show's Twitter at LO_Penguins. So I threw this idea out there today. So Friedman was on the Real Kuiper and Bourne podcast talking about Claude Giroux to the Toronto Maple Leafs. He says, if Giroux hits the market, I wouldn't be surprised if Toronto called him and just said, well, what would it take? He's definitely building a home in Ottawa. He's made it very clear at the deadline that he prefers to stay in the Eastern Conference. So before anyone attacks me here, what would you all think if Evgeni Malkin, if he did walk, which again, I don't want that to happen, but say he did walk and Claude Giroux is a free agent, would you be willing to throw money at him to come be the second line center behind Sidney Crosby and for him to officially give the baton back to Sidney Crosby in person? I understand, people were going to come to me and say, well, Hunter, he hasn't played center in a while. And, that's right. The last few seasons, he has been mainly a winger. The Flyers, he was their top line center for many years. They switched him to wing. And then, he had a couple of great seasons. And I believe his first season as a winger, he hit 100 points and led the Flyers to the playoffs. This is still a very good player. If I'm going to bring up his numbers from this year when he was in Philadelphia and Florida, total 21 goals, 65 points in 75 games. When he went to Florida, he had 23 points in just 18 games. So he's still proven that he can basically play at a point per game level. It's all a matter of, what kind of cap hit is he going to get? Is he going to be someone that, gets 8 to 9 million per year? In my opinion, I think you can probably get him below 8. I don't know if you can get him below 6. I think that's probably a little too wishful thinking. It's probably going to be between 6 and 8. I should say. And, I think the other big question is, would Giroux be, would he want to be a Pittsburgh Penguin after being a Philadelphia Flyer for over a decade? I mean, again, Marc-Andre Fleury, he didn't want to go to the Washington Capitals after being a Pittsburgh Penguin himself for well over a decade. Do players, still respect that rivalry? Would he, care that much to not go to Pittsburgh? But I will say this, I would much rather go after someone like Giroux and potentially move him to center and sign him to maybe like a 5x6, 6x6 deal than I would going after Vincent Trocheck. Giroux is a much better player than Trocheck, especially in the offensive zone defensively. Maybe it's not as good, but, he can still hold his own in the defensive zone. And, I also think Giroux can do great work for your power play. I know Malkin he's so good on the power play. No matter what, if he does walk, the power play is going to dip a little bit, at least a little bit next year. But, it all depends on who they bring in to replace him. Can that player, take his power play minutes and play well in them? And I think Giroux can do enough in those minutes, won't fully replace Malkin on the power play, but with his vision and with his shot, I really do think he would be, an asset on that advance. You can put him in Gino's spot, either on, the point, or you can put him at the left wing circle, and, he can basically do his thing there. So let me know what you all think about that. Would you be down to have Claude Giroux be a Pittsburgh Penguin? Let me know in the YouTube comments. Let me know. You can shoot me a DM on Twitter and all that jazz, or just, leave a comment anywhere for this episode. I think it would be a lot of fun. Chaos, especially, it would piss a lot of the Philadelphia Flyers fans off. I'm always here for something like that. It's silly season for a reason. Free agency's 9 days away. I'm here for at least the next few weeks because, it's going to be really crazy until the show goes down to 3 shows a week. So that'll do it, though, for this episode of the Locked On Penguins podcast. I know that segment was a little bit shorter, but wanted to get that idea in there and, give my thoughts on it, and then, ask you all what you guys would think about that. But I hope you all have a splendid 4th of July holiday. Eat some ribs for me, some mac and cheese, whatever you all do. Drink some beers if you're over 21. And, I'll be back here with another episode on Tuesday. We're getting closer to the draft. Free agencies next week. I will have all the latest Penguins news for you all right here on the Locked On Penguins podcast. So I appreciate all of you listening, and I'll talk with you all on Tuesday.